The Sacramento Bee ran the story on the 19th of November, 1897. Not on the front page, not under a banner headline. 3 columns in, beneath an advertisement for winter coal, the editors gave it the kind of measured, cautious space reserved for things they could not explain and did not wish to amplify. The headline read, "Airship seen over city. Witness report navigable craft with lights." The byline belonged to a staff reporter whose name appears in no subsequent edition of the paper. The record of his employment at the Bee ends that same week. If you're finding this story compelling, hit the like button and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It means a great deal to know who is paying attention. What the witnesses described was not a balloon. The distinction matters, and the people making it in 1897 understood the difference precisely. Balloons had been traversing American skies since the Civil War. Gas-filled envelopes drifting with prevailing winds, unsteerable, dependent on altitude shifts for directional approximation. What the witnesses in Sacramento described moved against the wind. It held a fixed course over the city for a duration that multiple independent accounts place between 12 and 22 minutes. It carried lights, white at the front, red at the rear, arranged in a configuration that several witnesses, including a retired engineer named Colonel H.G. Shaw, described in terms that implied intentional navigation signaling, the kind of marking system a pilot would use to communicate direction of travel to observers below. Shaw's account is the one the historical record has preserved most completely, because Shaw was not content to report what he saw. He pursued it. He and a companion, a man identified in the Bee's account as Camille Spooner, followed the craft in a hired carriage along the Sacramento River Road for approximately 3 miles before the object accelerated and disappeared to the northeast. Shaw published a detailed physical description in a letter to the editor that appeared 4 days after the initial sighting. The craft, he wrote, was approximately 150 feet in length. Its hull was slender, tapered at both ends. The surface appeared smooth, not fabric stretched over frame like a dirigible, but finished like a painted hull. The gondola beneath it was enclosed. The propulsion mechanism was not visible, but the sound, and Shaw was specific about this, was a low, regular mechanical hum, not the variable exhaust of a steam engine, not the wind drag of an unpowered envelope. Regular, consistent, the sound of something running. Shaw was 61 years old in 1897. He had served as an engineering officer in the Army of the Potomac. He had spent the decades after the war in land survey work throughout California's Central Valley, a profession that required precise observation of topography, distance, and atmospheric condition. His letter to the Bee does not read like excitement. It reads like a field report. He uses measurement language throughout. He estimates the craft's altitude at approximately 300 feet above the river surface. He notes the angle of the lights relative to the horizon. He describes the craft's banking turn, the angle at which it shifted course over the city grid, as consistent with a vehicle responding to control inputs, not atmospheric pressure. The Bee published his letter and then published nothing further on the subject. The reporter who filed the original story does not appear in the paper's masthead after November 22nd of that year. Shaw himself gave one subsequent interview to a San Francisco Examiner correspondent who came north specifically to follow the story, and then appears to have withdrawn from public comment entirely. His papers, if any survived, have not been located in any California archive. What makes the Sacramento sighting significant is not that it stood alone. The 1897 Airship Wave, as researchers have come to call it, was a documented phenomenon extending across at least 19 states over a period from November of 1896 through May of 1897. The Sacramento sighting sits near the end of that window. Before it came sightings over Oakland, over San Jose, over Stockton. Then reports began arriving from the interior, from farmers in the San Joaquin Valley, from a telegraph operator in Red Bluff, who sent a dispatch to Sacramento that was preserved in the Western Union Archive, and describes a craft with running lights traveling at a speed he estimated, by comparison to a passing locomotive, at somewhere between 60 and 80 miles per hour. The telegraph operator's name was William Lytle. He was a 12-year employee of Western Union with a documented record of accurate transmission and no prior reports of unusual incident. His dispatch is dated the 14th of November 1896. It sits in the archive without annotation. The official history of powered flight places its origin on the 17th of December 1903 at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, when Orville and Wilbur Wright achieved the first sustained, controlled, powered, heavier-than-air flight. That date is correct. What it does not address is what was in the air over California 7 years before it. The Wright brothers were running a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio in 1896. They had not yet begun systematic aeronautical research. The first dirigible to achieve reliable controlled flight, the Zeppelin LZ-1, did not lift off until July of 1900 at Lake Constance in Bavaria. The hydrogen-powered steam-driven airships of the experimental period, the Tissandier brothers' craft, the Renard and Krebs La France, had achieved limited controlled flight in France in the 1880s, but their operational range was measured in miles, not hundreds of miles, and their maximum speeds were below 15 miles per hour in calm conditions. No French experimental craft crossed the Atlantic. No American equivalent existed on any public record. The sightings were not confined to California. On the 2nd of April 1897, a craft was observed by hundreds of residents of the city of Chicago. The Chicago Tribune ran the account across 3 columns. Witnesses included a Cook County Circuit Court judge named Richard Tuthill, who observed the craft from the roof of the Cook County Courthouse for a period he estimated at 35 minutes. Tuthill's statement, reproduced in the Tribune and preserved in the Cook County Court Administrative Record, describes a cigar-shaped vessel traveling at a consistent altitude of approximately 500 feet over the lakefront, proceeding northeast over Lake Michigan until it passed beyond the visible horizon. Tuthill noted that the craft appeared to be operating under power throughout, maintaining altitude without the oscillation characteristic of gas-filled envelopes in wind, and that it carried a searchlight that swept the city streets below it in what he described as a methodical pattern, as though something aboard was looking for something specific on the ground. The searchlight detail recurs across multiple independent accounts from multiple cities across the spring of 1897. A farmer named Alexander Hamilton in Leroy, Kansas, whose account was published in the Yates Center Farmers Advocate on the 23rd of April 1897 and co-signed by 12 named witnesses, including the local justice of the peace, described a craft hovering over his property with a searchlight trained on his cattle pen. Hamilton's account became one of the most widely reprinted of the Airship Wave, though it has also been the most contested, partly because Hamilton was known locally as a storyteller of considerable skill. The co-signed affidavit, however, is a matter of public record. 12 names, 12 men who were willing to attach their identities to the statement. The wire services ran versions of the stories throughout the spring. Associated Press dispatches from April of 1897, archived in the Library of Congress newspaper collection, show accounts from Texas, from Iowa, from Tennessee, from Missouri. The language across the dispatches is consistent in ways that argue against coordinated fabrication. The craft described is always elongated, always carries lights, always moves with apparent control, and always, in the accounts from witnesses who heard it rather than merely saw it, produces the same low, mechanical, regular sound. The humming, not steam, not wind, something running. The Patent Office records for the years 1890 through 1900 contain no filing for a navigable lighter-than aircraft capable of sustained controlled flight at speeds above 30 miles per hour. This is documented. The United States Patent Office annual index for that decade is complete and has been digitized by the Smithsonian Institution libraries. What it shows is a steady stream of incremental improvements to balloon rigging, gas valve mechanisms, and gondola suspension systems. Nothing that would explain what was in the sky over Sacramento. Nothing that would explain what Judge Tuthill watched from the roof of the Cook County Courthouse for 35 minutes. The absence in the patent record is where the official account stops. A craft that sophisticated, the argument goes, would have required years of development work by a team of engineers, machinists, and materials suppliers. Development at that scale produces paper. It produces supplier invoices, payroll ledgers, workshop lease agreements, material procurement orders. Somewhere between the drawing table and a 150-foot operational hull, there is a paper trail. And the paper trail for the 1897 airships does not exist in any archive that has been opened to researchers. That absence has generated two categories of explanation which have coexisted in the literature since the sightings themselves. The first holds that the craft were experimental, privately funded, and deliberately concealed, the product of an inventor or consortium who had achieved a technological breakthrough they were not prepared to disclose, conducting operational trials over populated areas with a confidence that suggested the technology was past its developmental stage. The second holds that the paper trail does not exist in accessible archives because it was removed from them. If you've been following this investigation, subscribe and turn on notifications. There is more to uncover. Your support makes it possible to bring these buried histories to the surface. Thomas Edison was asked directly about the airships in April of 1897 by a reporter from the New York Sun. Edison's response, published on the 8th of April and preserved in the Sun's archive at the New York Public Library, was uncharacteristically brief. He said he knew nothing about any such craft, and that if such a thing existed he would have heard of it. He then declined to comment further. Edison, at that point in his career, had established working relationships with virtually every significant electrical and mechanical engineering operation in the United States. His comment that he would have heard of it was not modesty. It was a statement about the structure of the American engineering community in 1897, a community small enough and interconnected enough that a development program of that scale, operating within it, would have left traces he would have encountered. He said he had encountered none. The California State Library in Sacramento holds a collection of correspondence from the office of Governor James Budd covering the years 1895 through 1899. Within that collection, in a folder catalogued under General Public Correspondence for November of 1897, there are 3 letters from private citizens reporting the airship sightings and requesting the governor's office investigate. The letters are dated the 20th, 21st, and 23rd of November. There is no record of a reply to any of them. There is no record of any instruction from the governor's office to any state agency to examine the matter. The letters sit in the folder. Around them, other correspondence from the same period shows routine responses, land office queries answered within days, agricultural commission letters acknowledged by return post. The airship letters received nothing. The War Department archive for the same period, held at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, contains a thin file under the heading Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Western States, dated to 1897. The file was declassified in 1978 under a routine Freedom of Information request submitted by a researcher at the University of California whose name appears in the file's cover sheet as Dr. P.M. Corliss. The file contains 4 documents. The first is a routing memo from the Office of Secretary of War Russell Alger, dated the 26th of November, 1897, directing the Army Signal Corps to collect and retain any field reports related to unidentified aerial craft observed over California. The second is a Signal Corps acknowledgement dated the 30th of November. The third is a cover sheet for a batch of attached field reports dated the 15th of December 1897. The fourth document, which should be those field reports, is not in the file. The cover sheet lists them. They are not there. The archive's own catalogue record notes their absence without explanation, marking the gap with the single word withdrawn. Withdrawn. Not destroyed, not lost, not misfiled. Withdrawn, the administrative term for material removed from a file by an authorized party after the file was established. The withdrawal date is not recorded. The withdrawing party is not recorded. The cover sheet sits in the folder describing documents that are no longer behind it, and the archive offers nothing further. The Signal Corps field reports were collected from Army posts across California and Nevada. The posts from which reports were solicited are named on the cover sheet: the Presidio of San Francisco, Fort McDowell on Angel Island, the Benicia Arsenal north of Sacramento, and Fort Bidwell in the northeastern corner of the state near the Oregon border. Fort Bidwell's position is the one that warrants attention. It sat in high desert country at an elevation of approximately 4,500 feet, with clear sightlines across the Warner Range and the Modoc Plateau. A craft traveling northeast from Sacramento, the direction Colonel Shaw indicated when he described the object accelerating away from his carriage on the river road, would have passed within observable range of Fort Bidwell's posted sentries. Whatever those sentries reported went into the file. Whatever went into the file was later withdrawn. The cover sheet is what the record chose to leave behind, a page describing the shape of what was taken, rather than the thing itself. The newspaper accounts dried up by June of 1897. No single event ended them. The sightings simply stopped being reported or stopped being printed, with the abruptness of an editorial decision rather than a natural conclusion. The Bee ran no further airship stories after the 22nd of November. The Chicago Tribune's coverage ended in mid-April. The wire service dispatches slowed through May and ceased entirely by the summer. The wave had lasted approximately 7 months. Then the sky, in the record at least, went quiet. The photographs survived because they were not stored with the documents. That is the only reason they are still accessible. 4 glass plate negatives, held in the collection of the California Historical Society in San Francisco, catalogued under the heading Sacramento Valley, Miscellaneous, 1897. They were donated in 1931 by the estate of a commercial photographer named Daniel Waldron, who operated a studio on K Street in Sacramento from 1889 until his death in 1928. Waldron left no written record identifying what he had photographed or when. The catalogue entry was made by a library staff member who examined the plates on intake and described what she saw in a single sentence: elongated craft with lights, river setting, night exposure, date unknown. The plates have been examined twice by photographic historians. The first examination in 1954 produced a technical assessment concluding the negatives were consistent with glass plate photography of the 1890s and showed no evidence of darkroom manipulation detectable by the methods then available. The second examination in 2006 used digital scanning and grain analysis. The report, filed with the California Historical Society and available to researchers by appointment, confirmed the plate's age and noted that the object captured in the exposure did not match the silhouette profile of any balloon or dirigible type documented in the technical literature of the period. The plates are stored in acid-free sleeves in a climate-controlled drawer in the Society's research library on Berry Street. Anyone can request to see them. The record never disappeared. It was catalogued as miscellaneous and left where those who were not looking for it would never find it, which is a different kind of erasure and in some ways the more complete one. Thank you for staying with this until the end. If what you heard here stayed with you, the other films on your screen continue the investigation. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next one.